Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Thank you all for joining us today. We're going to give it just a couple minutes to let everyone join in case anyone's running late from any meetings. Completely understand how that goes. I did want to touch on an important housekeeping item. If you are sharing any links with any colleagues joining today, it will kick you and your colleagues out. So please be sure to register and join with your unique link just to prevent any Zoom interruptions, etc. But again, if you're joining, please join with your unique link. Any sharing of links, you will all be kicked out. So just want to prevent any Zoom interruptions today. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Anybody that's joining late, we're just going to run through the agenda, some introductions. So hopefully they won't miss the meat of the presentation. But again, just one last time, if you're joining us today or if you're sharing any links, Zoom will kick you and your colleagues out. So please be sure to join and register with your unique link. All right, that being said, welcome everybody to our Getting Started with Drata, our live customer onboarding call. Quick overview for the agenda today. The plan for today is to discuss the Drata onboarding process and really everything that you would need to get started with Drata, as well as a brief walkthrough of the implementation process. Quick introductions. I'm one of the CSMs that supports your team here. We also have Bobby on the call who will be managing some of the questions in the Q&A portion for us today. All right, a couple of housekeeping items. Again, please feel free to leverage the Q&A feature to ask any questions. This will help us better track questions and ensure that we are getting you all the answers that you need today, but also ensure that we are tweaking content for any future sessions to ensure that we're covering all the areas that we're expected to cover, etc. We will have the chat feature, of course, but Bobby will be dropping some helpful links, so don't want that to get too crowded in the call today. And again, please feel free to use that to respond to any prompts from us. And then as a follow-up, we will be providing a link to the recording as well as the slides and other helpful resources via email later today or latest tomorrow. And then a quick overview of what to expect. We'll discuss how to leverage Drata in your compliance journey, an overview of the Drata Quick Start Guide, and then again, we'll also review some additional resources that will help you guys get started as well. I do want to call out that in the second half of our call, we will be presenting in a demo environment. So what you see on the screen will look a little different than your own Drata tenant. Just want to give you a glimpse of the flexibility that we have. Okay, we know that time and resources are precious. That's why we don't focus on just fixing issues. We give you the tools and the resources to be successful on your own while providing you with a team of experts to ensure long-term success. This is what we like to call our 5 pillars of customer success. So Bobby and I live in that first field there, the customer success managers. Of course, you get access to a team of CSMs who will help you plan, prioritize, and reach your compliance goals faster. They will also help you provide information to propel your compliance journey. In that second field, we have our customer experience. We have focused on creating a robust customer experience by powering an AI help center, live trainings, on-demand videos to make it easy for your team to learn and self-serve anytime. I also want to call out one of our newest resources, Academy. You might have already seen the banner from your own Drata tenant. Highly, highly, highly recommend checking out Academy. There's a lot of helpful courses for those that are just getting started around some of our most frequently or our most popular areas within the platform as well. Okay, then you have your compliance assist. So any compliance related questions, we have an AI powered knowledge bot that was built by our in-house team of former auditors and security professionals. I'll also be showing you where to locate that as well as the technical support that we offer, which is round the clock support through our 24/7 knowledge bot. And then of course, our live experts are available 24/5 so that you can easily get the answers that you need. And then lastly, but surely not least, you also have your account manager, which will be a dedicated point of contact, ensuring that your Drata partnership continues to grow with your business. So as you look to mature your current GRC standings, if you'd like to add any frameworks, look at any additional features, your account manager can facilitate that conversation with you. Okay. Next, we'll spend some time talking through some of our most common frameworks as well as their typical auditing process. One of the most commonly utilized frameworks is the SOC 2 framework. SOC 2 is known as a flexible framework, meaning there is some flexibility in what trust service criteria that you plan to include within your audit. For SOC 2, there are five different categories of requirements, and these are called the trust service criteria. This includes security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. Of those, the only set of requirements that you have to include is the security requirement. This is going to be your baseline. The other four categories are essentially optional add-ins you can choose to include if you feel they are relevant for your business. You can also, of course, consult an auditor and get their recommendation on which of the TSCs to include. Another voice that I recommend listening to is the voice of the customer. If you have any customers or future prospects that are asking for a SOC 2 report, a natural follow-up question is, verifying what they want to see on that SOC 2 report. If there's any TSCs that they're looking to see, then that would also make it easier for your team to prioritize as well. Now, as far as the audits for SOC 2, there are two different types of audits that you can pursue. The first one is a SOC 2 Type 1. This is a point-in-time audit where the auditor is only looking to see if a control is in place, not necessarily how well that control is functioning over time. If this is your first time going through a SOC 2 audit, it can be helpful to start with the SOC 2 Type 1. This is also a good option if you need a report in hand faster, as the observation window is much shorter. Then we have the SOC 2 Type 2, which is a much more comprehensive audit. An auditor is not only looking to see if that control is in place, but also how well that control is functioning over time. Therefore, the observation window is longer. It's typically about 3 to 4 months for your first audit, and then after that, you enter into the 12-month surveillance audit. This is also where the monitoring portion of your Drata tenant is really going to come in handy to ensure that we are continuously meeting those compliance checks during that observation window. So for both types of SOC 2 audits, the preparation work in Drata is the exact same. You still need to put policies in place, satisfy all in-scope requirements and controls, and work towards that 100% readiness. All right, ISO 27001 is another framework that is commonly utilized. While there are similarities in some of the requirements and controls between ISO 27001 and SOC 2, ISO is a certification while SOC 2 is an attestation. The cornerstone of ISO 27001 is the Information Security Management System, otherwise known as the ISMS plan, which consists of policies, procedures, and controls in the pursuit of protecting its information assets. The ISO 27001 audit process is also a bit different than the SOC 2 audit process. The process kicks off with what's called an internal audit of the ISMS. This can be performed by someone internally at your organization if the internal person meets specific criteria. However, if you do not have someone internally to perform this, you can also engage a third party to do this. We have many partners in our Drata ecosystem that can assist with this if needed. Once that internal audit is complete, you will have the opportunity to remediate any findings, and then you enter into stage 1 of the audit, which is performed by your certified auditor. After stage 1, you have the opportunity to remediate any findings again, and then you enter into stage 2 with your certified auditor. After stage 2 is when you receive your finalized report. Again, ISO, SOC 2 are just some of our most frequently pursued audits, and we wanted to briefly provide an overview of each of their process. You may have other frameworks outside of these two, and we have included some resources around these in the follow-up for today, but of course, feel free to reach out with any specific questions. Okay, taking a step back here, I'd first like to talk to you through the key terms that you'll see throughout the rest of our call to ensure that we are all aligned. So again, providing a visual here to talk through the controls and how they roll up to fulfill the requirements of that given framework. So at the base of the pyramid, you have your control test and your evidence uploads. These are either automated by Drata or what can't be automated will be uploaded as a file or URL or using our API if needed. The controls are the main work that you're completing in-app to increase your framework readiness. Controls help enforce the policies, processes, and systems that are put in place to safeguard your customers' data. There's typically multiple controls that roll up to meet the requirements of a given framework. Those requirements consist of the overarching objectives that you must meet to be compliant within that framework, and you achieve compliance with requirements through implementing those specific controls. So, by providing evidence to your controls through automated tests or manual uploads, you're working to satisfy the individual controls that roll up to meet the requirements of a given framework. Let us know if there's any questions on that. Again, super, super important that we're all aligned on the key terms that we'll be seeing throughout the rest of our call today. All right, shifting gears to Drata implementation, I want to talk through these specific benchmarks or milestones that we think about when it comes to Drata implementation. So on the left, we have a reference timeline of typically how long it takes to achieve each milestone. Of course, that does depend on bandwidth, resources, and time dedicated to this process. The first milestone that we see here are connections. Connections are the integrations that you can establish within Drata. And the reason that you want to do this is to power the automation within Drata and take some of that evidence collection off of your plate. There are three critical connections that we think about: identity provider, infrastructure, and version control. Because they're setting up your automations, that is also why it is really important to complete this within step one. Once you have your connections in place, you'll then want to begin working on your policies. With the framework that you have purchased, Strata provides every template that you would need for that specific framework. So you can choose to leverage these templates, utilize any existing documentation, or you can choose to replace our templates entirely if you already have policies drafted and in place. Once your policies are in place, the next step is to then bring on your personnel. Once your identity provider has been connected, your personnel will technically be able to log into their version of Drata with their work email address, but they're not going to know to do that until you tell them to. There are three key pieces to onboarding your personnel. First is policy acknowledgement, second is security training, and third is device compliance. If you aren't using an MDM, you can of course use our Drata read-only lightweight agent, which will pull in this evidence collection for you. The next thing to think about is scoping out your framework for what is applicable and what is not applicable. This is also where an auditor can be helpful in deciding the scope of your audit and what should and should not be included. There's two places to do this. First is on the Frameworks tab, where you can review the additional trust service criteria we mentioned earlier that you may want to consider including in your audit. And the second is on the Controls page, where you can get a little bit more granular and scope out the individual controls. All right. A framework is composed of overarching requirements that must all be met to be compliant within that framework. In order to satisfy a singular requirement, you must satisfy the individual controls. Throughout your tenant, you might see DCF. DCF stands for Drata Control Framework. There are two buckets of controls. There's the monitored and the not monitored. So not monitored could look like a pen test, risk assessment, etc. But I do just want to call out that not everything is automated. And then the last step there, engage with an auditor early. We have an extensive auditor network and we are happy to make recommendations if needed. Okay, once you sign up with Drata, you'll have the opportunity to participate in our Compliance Accelerator program. It's a free 4-week partner-led program that helps you get audit ready faster without adding more to your plate. You'll work with a certified Drata partner who tailors the program to your needs. Maybe that's a gap assessment to see where you stand, help writing or reviewing policies that you're standing up for the first time, a tabletop exercise to strengthen your incident response, or a risk assessment to pinpoint and fix vulnerabilities. Ultimately, by the end, you'll have clear next steps, stronger documentation, and a solid compliance foundation. After that 4-week program ends, you can choose to keep working with the partner or hand things off to Drata's support team. It's the fastest, easiest way for smaller teams to get ahead on their compliance programs. I also wanted to touch on the importance of selecting an auditor early in the process. For most frameworks, the auditor can help you understand the process, define the scope of the audit, identify potential gaps that will need remediation, and clarify any requirements. If you haven't done so already, we recommend starting to review potential auditing partners and engage with them early on in your process. Bobby's also going to drop a link to questions to ask a potential SOC 2 auditor. Highly recommend reviewing this specific help article prior to any conversations that you're having with any potential auditors to ensure that we are asking the right questions and that this is going to be a strong partnership. The reason that we touch on this is because SOC 2 is a flexible framework, so every auditor is going to approach the process differently. It's really important that you're aligned in selecting a strong partner there. Okay, and then last thing I want to call out are our upcoming events. I apologize, the dates are a little bit off here, but did want to plug it in from the last session that we had in case you're looking up any recordings. But of course, we also have our bite-sized sessions. Those are bi-weekly. We have our SOC 2 Express from setup to audit ready, and then we also have the from zero to ISO 27001, the five-phase blueprint. So highly recommend if these are our areas where we're focused, attending our webinars where we talk through the process and the framework in a little bit further detail. Whenever you're ready, we also have a pre-audit webinar that I highly recommend reviewing ahead of any upcoming audits that you have. All right, I'm gonna temperature check to see if we have any questions, Bobby, that you'd like to raise to the group.
We are all good as of right now.
Okay, perfect. And then just a reminder, everyone, any questions that you have, please, please, please utilize the Q&A to ensure that we are keeping track and answering all of the questions that you all have. All right, perfect. So transitioning into the demo environment, now that we've talked a lot about the why, I want to put together how this translates into your Drata tenant and where you can get started today. So first things first, I do want to call out the dashboard. The dashboard is going to be your quick checks, if you will. So for instance, if I'm coming in here, I'm looking at our total failing test. Even this will give me an idea of where I need to spend time. If all of my failing tests are on infrastructure, then I know, okay, I need to get my AWS guy to come in and resolve all the tests that are associated with AWS, etc. You can get a quick check on your personnel, on how your connections are performing, on your policies, right? So again, highly recommend the dashboard and leveraging that for the quick check that you would need. Now, what I want to open up is the quick start guide. So I know we mentioned this in our presentation. The quick start guide is the easiest way to get implemented, right? So for these initial steps here, highly recommend using this as your roadmap to implementation. Opening up this first tile here, provide basic info. When I open up that drop down, it's going to give me the option to go to company info settings. As you can see, that has shortcutted me to settings and then organization details. Really important to fill out as much information as you can here. You might have some items, maybe like a privacy policy URL, terms of use URL that you're still working on implementing, just as long as we know to come back here and populate those items as they become applicable to you and your business. Okay. After that, the next real first step, if you will, is going to be making connections to power the automation. So as you can see here, the first one that you're going to be setting up is your identity provider connection. Super, super important that we are starting off with this one. Whenever I select go to identity connections, that's going to shortcut me to connections, identity, and then it's shortcutting me to the available tab. So you have two tabs here. This will show you all of the active connections that you have. This one will show you the potential connections that you could make, right? Now, one thing that I would highly recommend as you go through your connections in that first step, I would highly recommend pulling up the documentation for each of those connections. So for instance, we have our little question mark icon in the bottom right-hand corner. That is our built-in mini help center. Now, whenever you expand this, you have a few different options here. For instance, there's that Drata Academy resource that I was referring to earlier. We have training videos, help docs. If you have any feedback, right, as far as maybe there's an integration that we don't natively support that you'd like to see, etc. But what I want to call out is this question mark icon, the bottom right-hand corner, that help icon. This is going to be all of our knowledge-based articles and the resources that we have around them. So for instance, if I'm connecting Okta here for my identity provider, I would select Okta, Okta integration guide for identity management, and then that's going to pull up all of the steps that I would need to successfully make this connection. If you'd prefer to have this in a separate tab, you can scroll all the way down to the bottom and then select Open in Help Center. But regardless of whatever integration we're making, highly, highly recommend making sure that we have that guide open first to ensure that you have a smooth and successful connection experience. Okay, going back to the quick start guide, I'm going to skip over these because ultimately it's going to be the same process just for the connection that you're trying to make. And we're going to move to our third tile, establish continuous compliance for your frameworks. So the first option here is assign roles to your team, right? So when I click on that, go to role administration, that's going to shortcut me to settings, role administration. And this is where I have the ability to create my admins. Now you'll notice that this step is after identity provider for a reason, right? We have to first pull in all of our personnel before we can make them an admin. So I do just want to call out that whoever is making your identity provider connection should be the super admin of that account so that we can get to the next step of adding any admins that you'd want. To add an admin, I would select assign role. I could search for that member. I'm going to use Bobby as an example because alphabetically it makes the most sense. Perfect. And then I would select the role that I want. So as you can see, we have a lot of roles here. We also provide, a brief little definition so that you're also getting a glimpse into the amount of access that we have. And then on the bottom, you'll see all of the read-only roles. So if there's somebody that we want to invite into the platform, maybe there's somebody in your C-suite who wants to have access to see the progress, but they don't need to actually tweak anything, etc., then that's what that read-only role can really come in for. I do want to call out that underneath admin, information security lead or infosec lead. That's usually the most secondly utilized role as well because it is a little bit more limiting than an admin, but they still have the scope of what they would need to access there. Once I find the role that I would want, I would select save and create my admin there. Again, going to point out the mini help center. If you are looking for any specific guidance on, hey, I want to make sure they have access to XYZ, you can always ask a question here to also get some additional guidance there. Okay, going back to our quick start guide, after you've added your admins, the next step here is to scope out your framework requirements. So we talked a little bit about this in the presentation. I'm going to focus on SOC 2 so that you can get a glimpse into the TSCs or the trust service criteria that we were referring to earlier. So whenever you come in here, the best way to double check and see how many requirements that we have in scope is to filter to the in scope first, right? So as you can see, I have that filter applied, and then I can check on each trust service criteria to see what requirements will be pulled in scope if I were to bring that in scope, right? So looking at security, again, this is going to be your baseline. This one is required for SOC 2, so you do want to leave security in scope, of course. But if I move to availability, I'm looking at these requirements. Okay, this aligns with what we have implemented or what we can implement prior to our first SOC 2 audit. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this one in scope. Now, for example purposes, let's say I get to confidentiality. This one is currently marked out of scope. I'm reviewing, right, to see what scope or what requirements I want to bring in to out of scope to get a little bit of a better idea of what requirements are included with confidentiality. If I review these, and I do want to prioritize these after discussing them with my auditor, I would select the check mark in the top left-hand corner and then select mark in scope. That would then move the requirements to it from out of scope to now in scope, and they are going to be included in my audit. Now, alternatively, after discussing with my auditor, maybe I don't want to pursue availability at this time for my first iteration of SOC 2, so I need to mark these out of scope. In order to do so, again, checkbox in the top right-hand corner. Oops, excuse me. Put that in scope filter on. Checkbox in the right-hand corner. Select mark out of scope. And whenever I do that, that's going to provide a business rationale box. Highly important that we take the time to fill this out so that when it comes to the audit, your auditor is proactively receiving this information of why we have chosen to mark this specific TSC out of scope and why we're not pursuing it for that specific audit. Okay, any questions on scoping out from the requirement level?
We are all good right now.
Okay, perfect. The next thing that I want to show is again exactly that thinking back to that pyramid image that we saw in our presentation and just translating that to the Drata tenant. So again, all of these are the requirements that need to be met in order for SOC 2, or in order for you to be that 100% ready for SOC 2. So as you can see, I have 8 out of 59 requirements that are currently being met. Now, if I wanted to dig into this a little bit more, why isn't CC 1.2 ready, etc., I could click on that and then tab over into the controls page. Now, there are 3 controls that are associated with CC 1.2. So these 3 controls all need to be in a ready state so that this overall requirement is in a ready state. Now, the reason I'm only seeing a number one here, even though there's three controls, is because there's only one control that is not ready, right? So this is a quick win for me. I know that I could go into DCF 42, get this control to a ready state, and then get this overall requirement to then a ready state. So again, when it comes to scoping, highly recommend first coming at it from a requirements perspective and then going into a granular perspective of looking at the individual controls that are associated to each requirement. All right, and that is actually the next step on the quick start guide. So we've added our admins, we've looked at what TSCs we want to include. Then the next thing that we would recommend is doing that on a granular level, right? So now that you have your requirements, we can then go through the individual controls to see what we want to include there. Looking at my filters, I have in scope on, and I'm looking only at the framework for SOC 2. Now, regardless, whatever framework you have enabled is still going to showcase if this control overlaps with other frameworks that you may have enabled within your Drata tenant. So just something to call out there. Now, on this controls page, as I mentioned, this is where you'll be able to get more granular with it. Maybe you've met with your auditor and you guys have discussed background checks. For the time being, for your first iteration, you're going to mark this out of scope because that's not something you're planning on implementing until your second iteration of SOC 2, etc. So same process, we would check the box to the control we want to mark out of scope. And then when we do that, that action item or the action menu appears at the bottom of the screen. I would then select Mark Out of Scope to move this specific control to my Out of Scope tab. Okay. I also, while we're on this page, want to discuss what makes a control ready. That's a really, really frequently asked question. So using background checks as our example here, one thing I want to call out is that you have your four boxes. You also have your progress bar at the top here, which is also letting you know what's preventing this control from being ready. But keeping in mind, these four boxes will also help you as well. Now, if you don't have approval set up, this isn't going to prevent a control from being ready. But if you do have approval set up, if all of these boxes have check marks and this approval still hasn't been given, that is ultimately going to prevent the control from being ready. So just something to keep in mind when setting up that layer of approval, that we could have, again, all the checkboxes off, but we still need that layer of approval to get this control to green, if you will. Now, most controls will have a policy requirement. So as you can see, we have multiple policies that are mapped to this singular control. We have the AI risk management policy, code of conduct, and InfoSec policy. Now, one thing I will call out is that this InfoSec policy is currently in a draft mode. So that's why we're not getting that check mark when it comes to the policy requirement being completed. We do want all of the associated policies to be in that published state to prevent that control or to ensure that the control is ready. Then looking at this, because this monitoring box is published, that tells me that this is an automated control, that they have some type of monitored evidence connected to it, right? And I can also verify that in the evidence tab as well. So the evidence tab will let you know, hey, these are the two pieces of evidence that we have for this specific control. The source is a test, right? So it's a monitoring test. Now, because the status is failed, then my next step would then to then review the tests that are associated with this. So as you can see, the tests that are pulling up under the monitoring tab are the one, employee background checks, and then two, contractor background checks. From here, I can then expand this window so I can understand, okay, how long has this test been failing, right? 600 days. That's very concerning, but this is the demo environment, so please keep that in mind. And then if I wanted to dig into this even more, I could then select this open here, which will shortcut me to the monitoring tab, looking specifically at the test that we were just reviewing. Now, all of these tests will also have an associated help article with how to get this specific test to passing, and additional steps as far as like the how, the why, etc. So highly recommend when it comes to tackling your monitoring tests to review the associated help articles there. Okay, we kind of took a little bit of a detour looking at controls, what makes a control ready, etc. But that's super, super important. I want to make sure we all walk away feeling confident. So please let us know if there's any questions on what's preventing a control from being ready. One thing I will also call out is that if a control isn't ready, it will have this little diamond next to it. That diamond will give you a brief summary of what is preventing the control from being ready. So, as you can see, policies, evidence, approvals, I'm getting my little red dot on the monitoring. That's telling me that I have some associated monitoring tests here that are failing and that I need to get these to pass in order to get the control to then pass. Now, we're talking a lot about monitored controls, but I do want to call out that there are a bucket of not monitored controls that do need to be satisfied. So, whenever selecting those specific controls, you'll notice that the monitoring box is actually empty, right? So, you can map tests there, but something to keep in mind here is that if a not monitored control is doesn't have tests for a reason out of box, right? Typically, the evidence that an auditor is wanting to see for this type of control would look like a file, a URL, a screenshot, etc. But some layer of manual verification is required for these not monitored controls. So if you map a test to ensure that you're staying compliant within this specific control, great, but still ensure that we are still providing that layer of manual evidence, which an auditor is going to want to see. While we're discussing not monitored controls, another great help article to plug is our evidence guidance doc for these not monitored controls. Let me see. Okay, perfect. So as you can see, we have them depending on what specific framework you're wanting to look at, but highly recommend bookmarking this help article. This will also help you go through and satisfy the evidence, or at least help unblock you, right? So if you're just really not sure what the type of evidence an auditor would want to see for access provisioning, here is a example of what an auditor would want to see there as you're going through and satisfying those not monitored controls. Okay, going back to our controls page, again, we discussed what makes a control ready, what to look for. We have the quick check options as well. Other items that I want to point out while we're on this page, it's really important to assign owners to your control to ensure that this isn't a one-stop process, right? So this is something that is going to continue to grow with you and with your team, and ownership is a really critical part of that. So as you go through your controls, highly recommend assigning owners there. You can also do this in bulk. So if there's multiple controls that I know will fall under one specific personnel member, etc., I can always check off those owners. And then when that action menu appears at the bottom, assign/remove control owners there. So again, that is something you're able to facilitate in bulk. And then the last thing I want to call out are the filters on the left-hand side. Your filters are your best friend. Highly recommend leveraging these so that we are staying on track. Going back to the control owners, this also makes it a cleaner to-do list for them. So Bobby knows that when he comes in, he can just filter to his name and look at the controls that are associated to him and have his to-do list for the day. Something else that I want to call out is approvers. So if you're looking to see the controls that are still waiting for an approver, right? We have our required approvals. We can see which have been prepared for approvers or needs approval, etc., to ensure that there's nothing that is waiting just for that last piece to ensure that your controls are ready and accurately reflecting that. Okay, I'm gonna take a step back. Any questions on the controls page or anything that we just reviewed?
We're all set right now.
All right, perfect. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and navigate back to the quick start guide. As a recap, on the established continuous compliance piece, we assigned our admins or other type of roles that we wanted to provide there. We scoped out our frameworks on the requirements level, and then we scoped out our frameworks on the control granular level. The next step from there is to then look at onboarding your personnel. So for this, or really I should say setting up the onboarding experience for your personnel. That's what we're looking at with this specific tile. The first option that we have here is to set up your HRIS connection. Your HRIS connection is an optional connection because what this is providing is supplemental information, right? So your identity provider is that main source of truth. Your HRIS is going to provide supplemental information such as hire date information, right? So just something to keep in mind. If you have an HRIS connection, great. If you don't, it's not a huge loss of automation. It's really, again, an optional connection for a reason. Regardless, if we're connecting it, I would still recommend pulling up the associated help article to help you make that connection. The next tile that we have here is verify employment status of personnel. So whenever I select that, that's going to shortcut me to governance and then looking at the personnel tab. I'm going to clear out the filters that I had from the last conversation that I had around this. And then as you can see, I'm automatically looking at all current personnel. And this is the status column that we want to pay attention to. So after your personnel have been brought in from that step one connection that you made with your identity provider, you would then go through and just ensure that this is accurately reflecting, is this a current employee? Is this a former employee? Is this a current contractor, former contractor? Or maybe it's a service account, right? So such as help@drata.com, regardless, something that doesn't need to be in the scope of your audit. That does need to be indicated there so that that isn't preventing any test or any information from looking at the wrong accounts. Okay, going back to the quick start guide here. The next tile that we have is to set up internal security settings. So whenever I select that, that's going to shortcut me to settings and then personnel compliance. And again, we're looking at setting up the onboarding experience for your personnel. So on this first one, internal security, this is all around workstation configuration monitoring. So if you have an MDM, such as Rippling, Kanji, Intune, if you're a Microsoft shop house, that is going to be where we make that connection first. And then we would come back into this page and select automated via MDM. So that way the system knows to look for that MDM for this device collection piece. Now, if you don't currently have an MDM, no worries. What you could also leverage is the Drata agent here. By checking this box, this is going to allow your personnel to walk through these steps of downloading that Drata agent and ensuring that that is properly registered so that we are able to pull in that device compliance collection piece. And just as a quick reference, I'm going to go back to personnel. I apologize for the fast scroll over. These are the device collection pieces that the Drata agent is automatically collecting for you. So do they have a password manager? Do they have auto updates? Is their disk encrypted, antivirus, lock screen, etc.? So with the Drata agent or your MDM, we're automatically pulling in those pieces for you. Now going back to the internal security, the last option that you have here is manually allowing your personnel to upload their evidence in Drata. So when they log into their version of Drata and they're greeted with the onboarding screen, if you have any personnel members that are leveraging maybe personal devices, they don't want to download the Drata agent, etc., this could be a good option for them to, again, manually provide those screenshots. We also provide them with the directions to ensure that those pieces are properly set up within their devices as well. So again, great option here if you have anybody that is using any personal laptops, etc. The only caveat that I would call out with manually uploading is that you do want to make sure before going into any audit that that is the most up-to-date information that your auditor would need on your personnel. So just having them come back in and re-upload, with the timestamp of the most up-to-date version of that. Okay, I'm going to tab over into training. So we see our options here based off of the frameworks that you have enabled. So if we only have SOC 2 or ISO, you're only going to get the security awareness training. If you have HIPAA, you'll get the HIPAA training. If you have any AI frameworks, you'll get the AI training as well. Now, going back to looking at our setup, if you have a security training connection, so if you have KnowBe4 or curricula, etc., we can make that connection first and then come here and select this option so that the system knows to only look to those integrations for those certificates of completion to verify that your personnel have taken that training for the year, etc. If you don't have any type of learning management system, no worries. You can always use the the Drata's embedded security training, where we can automatically pull in those certificates of completion once that has been completed by your personnel. And that again is also made available on their page or their version of Drata. The other thing that I would call out here, you do have a couple of different options. So you can have your conducted outside and then the personnel just upload that own piece of evidence manually. So that would be a good situation if you're using a learning management system that we don't natively integrate with. So let me just, while we're discussing it, go back to connections, select available, uncheck what I was last looking at and check off security training. So if you don't see something that we integrate with natively here that you're using or that you're leveraging, you could always still have your personnel complete those and then still provide that manual route for them to upload that manually. So just another option there. Or last option that we see here, an admin can upload that personnel's evidence within the personnel, so or personnel tab. So just a couple different options that you have. Regardless of whatever you enable, I would highly recommend turning on the schedule recurring training resets. Now, the reason that you want to do this is because most frameworks require this training to be completed on an annual basis. So whether we designate that to be on the same date or just after the last time they took it, etc., regardless, you want this to reset across your system so that it recognizes that the security awareness training has expired and is now needs to be refreshed. If we don't turn this on, this is going to be a one and done situation. So once your personnel members have taken that training, it's not going to know to look for it within the next year. And we want to ensure that there's no gaps within your compliance process. So just a quick tip there. And then the last tab that we have here, human resources. This is all around background checks. So I would definitely discuss background checks and your current setup with your auditor. If there's any exceptions or anything that needs to be made there, highly recommend aligning with them on that first prior to the audit. But regardless, you still have a few different options with Drata here. So first one being allow personnel to conduct new background checks with a connection. So if you have any background check connections that we support, I would recommend making that connection first and then coming in here and checking off this box here. Or it will be manually uploaded per employee on the personnel page or automated via that connection. So one huge clarification that I want to make, you're not uploading the actual background check for your personnel. Drata does not want to house sensitive information such as background checks. What we are trying to provide is the path that an auditor would take should they need to verify a background check on any of your personnel members. So what that would look like here, if I needed to manually provide that, I'm going to select a specific personnel member. I'll come into background check here, and then I would upload evidence. As you can see, when I select that, it is looking for a URL. And again, that is intentional. We don't want the actual file. We don't want the actual background check within Drata itself. We simply want to provide the auditor the path that they would take to verify the background check if necessary during the auditing period. Okay. We talked a lot about personnel. We talked a lot about setting up their um, specific onboarding experience. Those are the three main tabs here to do so. Just as a quick little overview of what that version of Drata would look like for your personnel members. So they wouldn't see any of these tabs on the left-hand side. They would only see what you have set up for them. So first things first, it's going to be policies. They would go through. They would view and acknowledge any policies that they need to, etc. After that, enable MFA on identity provider. As you can see, this is really, just a step for them, but there's no action needed on their side as this is done mostly on a global scale. So just something to call out there. And then we have our options for Drata agent. So with what we've set up for them is to download the Drata agent because we don't currently have an MDM. So as you can see, we provide the instructions here on how to download and then register the Drata agent. Or we've also provided them the option to manually provide this evidence as well. So as you can see, we do provide the information on how to do these things, and then we provide the space for them to then upload that screenshot themselves. Then, as you can see, we also have the Drata's embedded security training. It is living within that onboarding page. They would just select start training and complete that directly on this onboarding page for them. All right. And that is onboarding your personnel. Now, one thing that I would call out is you don't want to start this process, right? Oh, well, we can start the setup. That's totally fine. And again, that's here on the Quick Start Guide for a reason. But you don't want to invite your members in quite yet, right? This last little one, this last little item here, onboarding your personnel, we provided a template. So depending on what kind of shop you are, we use a lot of Slack, right? So that was just something that they could tweak and then pop into a Slack channel to get everybody on the same page. Or if you're an email type of company, you can absolutely leverage that into an email communication, etc. But regardless, we want to ensure that all of the policies are first set up before sending out that information. And the reason that you want to do that is, as you saw on the onboarding page, right? If your policies aren't in a published state, that first field is going to be completely blank for them. So we don't want them to have to come into Drata multiple times, etc. Make it one stream seamless process for them and ensure that your policies are all set up and published first. So as you can see within that last tile on the quick start guide, that's going to shortcut me to our governance and then looking specifically at policies here. Now, depending on the frameworks that you have enabled within your contract and within your Drata tenant, that is going to be the templates that you have access to. Right now, all of your Drata templates are pre-mapped to the supporting controls, right? So what I mean by that is looking at the asset management policy, you have multiple tabs up here. The controls tab is going to show you all of the controls that are pre-mapped to this specific policy, right? So going back to the bird's eye view of the framework, with SOC 2, policies are very much a say and do process, right? So policies, this is what we're saying we're doing, the controls, this is how we're doing it. And then the evidence that you're providing to these controls are proof to your auditor that you're doing it. So, really important that our policies have these controls mapped because they showcase to your auditor exactly how you're meeting the objectives that you've outlined within your policy. Okay, let me know if there's any questions on that because that's super important to understand. Now, with your policy, you have a lot of different options for in-app guidance, right? So as I mentioned, when I tab over into policy for the specific template, you'll see all this little yellow verbiage. Again, this is, oops, sorry. This is there and designed to help you further build out these policies. So if I click on this little speech bubble, it'll let you know, hey, these items are optional for SOC 2, but they may be required for other frameworks such as ISO 27001, etc. Again, lots of great in-app guidance to further help you build out this template and ensure it's reflecting your current environment. If you're looking for additional guidance, I'm going to direct you back to the Help Center that we have built into the app. For this one, I'm going to type in asset management. Perfect. And then as you can see, we have policy guidance on most of the templates that we have here. And this is going to be much, much more in depth. So again, highly recommend as you build out your policies to leverage the in-app guidance that we have, as well as the help articles that we have associated with it. And then last thing I'll plug here, also recommend the Compliance Accelerator program that is complimentary to you for the first few weeks. So highly recommend taking advantage of that, especially if you have never stood up policies. That is included in their scope of work. So just want to call out that information. Okay, and then once your policy is in that approved state, as you can see for here, we have set up layers of approval. That's not necessary. We can set up however many approvals we want. This is again just giving you a glimpse into the flexibility, but ultimately you do want to have some type of layer of approval that an auditor can see that this was reviewed, approved, etc. And you also again want to have a policy owner that is for setting up more of a process here and not just a one and done. And then on workflows, you can also look at, what type of approval we have set up. So the first tier is going to HR, second tier is going to legal. Again, this is just for example purposes. You can have this sent out to one person and have one approver. That's totally fine and acceptable. But ultimately, what you want to see is this published status, right? We want to see published across the board for all of our policies. And we want to see that they are approved, and you want to see that the renewal date is the most up to date. So as you can see, this renewal is being required soon. That might be a good idea to go ahead and kick off this renew and review process early, etc. But ultimately, you do want to ensure that the renewal date is very up to date. Okay, and then the last thing I'll talk about on policies is creating your own. So, looking at the templates, if you have policies that are already existing, right, and you'd rather use those than the Drata templates, maybe you have one policy that's encompassing 4 or 5 of our templates, etc. We can actually create that policy here. So the first question here is going to ask you the source of the policy content. You have two different options. You can upload a file or you can author that policy within Drata. The biggest difference is that when it comes to the renew and review process, right, the following year, on that annual basis, you would just have to copy the same one that we went with for the first time. So what I mean by that is if we upload an existing policy file, you're not going to be able to edit that directly within Drata. We would just upload, the most recent version of it when it comes to that renew and review process. Now, if you author the policy within Drata, you'll still get that WordPress environment that we saw within the template. So completely up to you. Either option is totally fine. It's really just how we want to set up that process. Then you're going to add your basic details here. Again, we want to ensure that the renewal date is set out to at least a year, etc. Create an owner there. I'm going to make Bobby the owner of this one and include a disclaimer if needed, etc. On details, or excuse me, on personnel groups, it's also going to ask you who does this policy apply to, right? So let's say this policy that I'm importing is only going to apply to a specific group of personnel. Maybe it includes my engineering team, my development team, my team that's really in the nitty-gritty of the technical side of the house, but doesn't need to necessarily be acknowledged by our marketing team or sales team who don't typically touch those tools, processes, etc. Right? I can either use specific groups or if this is a policy that applies to everyone within the business, I can always designate that to be all personnel as well. If I select policy doesn't apply to personnel, this policy is not going to look for acknowledgement, right? So for that acknowledgement basis, it is not going to be checking to see if this has been acknowledged by personnel if we select this last little option there. And then lastly, this question here, should this policy replace any Drata default policies? Again, this is optional, but it's super important that we are replacing the templates if that is the goal here. So I would select yes, replace default policies, and then select policies to replace. Again, for example purposes, if this is encompassing, 4 of our templates, I would just want to check off all 4 to ensure that the mappings that are automatically made to these templates are carried over into the policy that I'm replacing them with, right? Again, so because when it comes to the audit, we want to ensure that the controls are mapped to the appropriate policies to show our auditors that, hey, we're not just saying we're doing it, this is how we're doing it as well. Okay. Any questions on that? Any questions on the policies or controls or anything that we talked about, Bobby?
You're all good right now. Something just came in. A security engineer is not allowed to write policies related to HR. I think that depends on your situation. I'm not sure if there's additional context there.
Yeah, and that would also be something that you could field to our third-party partners who assist with that compliance accelerator program for any, scenarios that you may have that are maybe a little bit more unique or you're unsure about. Absolutely feel free to field those to the CAP program partner that you work with. But ultimately, it's not typically who authors it. It's usually around the approval process. That's usually the key there, is who is reviewing it, who has approved it, who has given that final stamp, right? That's typically the more important piece rather than who authored that. But great question.
Yeah, that's it in terms of questions right now. Oh yeah, it says general question for the end of the session. Can you provide a link of dates, registration for deeper dive topic webinars? I believe they'll receive links for our webinars, but yeah, Carmen's also showing you how you can access that within Drata as well.
Yeah, perfect. So as you saw, whenever I select live training, it's going to shortcut you to our Zoom page for the Drata customer success team. One session that I would really recommend signing up for are the bite-sized sessions. So we cover multiple different topics. These are held bi-weekly. Our next one is going to be Wednesday, July 29th. It's all around your personnel. So if that's something that we're struggling with, highly recommend joining. Our next one, August 12th, is going to be around controls and monitoring. So I do recommend that specific webinar. And then we do have some express webinars as well. So, or like our policy power hour. This is that pre-audit check that I was referring to whenever we're ready for that specific section, etc. But yes, you can access that in app as you saw. And then this is also another huge win for us. So the Drata Academy, those are self-serve courses, walkthroughs. So if you're somebody who learns like me, you'd rather go through more of like a course, highly recommend the Drata Academy there.
We had another question that just came in. It says, do you suggest to have readiness assessment contracts by third parties from the first few days to make sure we don't make any assumptions and waste time, especially for startups? I'd recommend engaging with an auditor early in the process because they can help you determine the scope of your audit. And then additionally, you can take advantage of our compliance accelerator program and they can help get you started. So, I'd recommend going those two routes. Carmen, do you have anything else you would add there?
Yeah, no, I think that was great. I think if you're really struggling over, items such as like your scope, you don't know what to include, highly recommend engaging with an auditor as early as you can. I know one partner in particular, Sensiba, they will actually create like a starter pack for you, or they leverage like a Drata starter pack. So it takes your list of default controls from like 150 to around like 80, 90, etc. So already trimming it down to specifically look at controls that are more common in like a startup environment, right? Because some of these controls are going to be a little bit more graduated, if you will, looking for like a more mature process, etc. So if that's what we're struggling with, is as far as like our scope, our to-do list, I recommend contracting with an auditor early so that you have those questions answered right away and that you're only focusing on implementing or providing evidence for the controls that will be in the scope of your audit. All right. In case that was referring to vendors, let me know because we can also dig into that as well. But other than that, I think those are all of our questions. That was the areas that we wanted to spend time in for our call today. Again, we wanted to specifically focus on the implementation steps. So, just a quick review before we go today. First, you're going to make your connections. You're going to focus on your key connections. Then you'll look at scoping out your environment. Then you'll set up the onboarding process for your personnel, and then you'll work on your policies, right? After your policies, that's when you can then formally bring on your personnel. But those are really the three key steps that we think about in terms of implementation. And the do, right, going back to control readiness, these absolutely have an effect on whether your controls are ready or not. Again, if it has a policy requirement, that policy hasn't been published, you could have the evidence, you could have the approval, but the control will still remain out of readiness because that policy requirement hasn't been met. So that's why we harp on the implementation step so much. You want to ensure that those aren't preventing you from having any of your controls be ready, and you can just focus on satisfying the evidence piece of it all, etc. The other tab that we didn't really dig into too much is the monitoring tab. Just like a quick little tip here, I would recommend whenever we're looking at this tab to only look at the enabled and have that filter checked, etc. That way you know that you're only looking at the tests that are applicable to you and your environment. The enabled are only going to show the ones that are based off of the active connections that you had made within step one. And then again, just to reiterate, with all of your monitoring tests, because this is the evidence for the associated control, right? So DCF 71 is looking for test 98 to be passing, etc. But if you're unsure how to get this test to pass, all of our tests will have an associated help article. So this is a great way to leverage this and ensure that you're following all the right steps. And then again, I feel like I've harped on this a lot, but I just want to make sure that we all feel comfortable navigating this. If you get a little stuck, maybe you've tried the steps outlined in this help article, maybe you got stuck on step three, you can always open up a chat with our technical support. Let them know, hey, I'm on test 98. I got stuck on step three. What would you recommend? right? This is a great way to help unblock you. And then if it does need to turn into a support ticket, we can always do that as well. And Bobby and I can always escalate any items on, or your CS team or the support team can always escalate items on your behalf. But other than that, I really appreciate all of the engagement today. Thank you all so much for the time. As we mentioned, we will be sending a follow-up, including the slides, link and other, or link to the recording and other helpful resources as well. But please let us know any questions that you have. You can always reach out to our support team, as I mentioned, through the app or the little in-app technical support chat we just looked at. So yeah, we are here for you throughout this journey and expect to hear a little bit more from us. And we hope to see you all again soon on some of our other live trainings. But other than that, have a great rest of your day.